Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Bipartisan Policy Center. My name is Dennis Shea, and I am the Executive Director of BPC's J. Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy. This will be the 9th conversation in our Leaders Speakers series, which is intended to spotlight individuals who understand the foundational importance of housing and have made significant contributions to improving housing affordability in our country. Today, we are excited, I must say we are very excited to welcome a distinguished guest, Adrianne Todman, Acting Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. As most of you know, HUD is the $70 billion federal agency tasked with helping meet America's housing needs and strengthening our nation's communities, housing and urban development. HUD also plays a vital role in enforcing federal fair housing laws. To those of us in the housing field, our guest today, Adrianne Todman, needs no introduction. Simply put, she has devoted most, if not all, of her professional life to helping her fellow citizens achieve affordable, stable housing. Before assuming her new position last month, Acting Secretary Todman served as the agency's Deputy Secretary, the number 2 official in the department, where she focused on both operational and policy priorities. These priorities included efforts to increase affordable housing supply and improve the agency's responsiveness to natural disasters. From 2017 to 2021, Acting Secretary Todman was the CEO of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, which represents more than 26,000 housing and community development providers. Prior to her work at NARO, she served as the Executive Director of the District of Columbia Housing Authority, where she worked to house veterans experiencing homelessness, increase homeownership opportunities for low and moderate income families, and implement multiple redevelopment efforts. Acting Secretary Todman's career in public service began in the office of Congressman Ron Lugo, who represented the U.S. Virgin Islands, where she was born and raised. So, Acting Secretary Todman, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have you.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Just got to do a little housekeeping. Before starting our conversation, let me remind our virtual audience that if you have any questions for our guest, you can post them to our Twitter X account at BPC_bipartisan using the hashtag BPCLive. You are also welcome to submit your questions in the YouTube chat. We will save some time at the end of our conversation to take questions from both our in-person and virtual audiences. So with that, let's start having a conversation.
Very good.
So, very interesting background. You were raised in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and you worked for, as I mentioned in the introduction, the territory's first representative to the U.S. Congress. How has that experience, how has your background influenced your commitment to public service and specifically to housing policy?
Sure. I will say, and this is good news for all you 20-somethings out there, that this is not a path I thought I would be on. When I grew up in the U.S. Virgin Islands, I think the impact that it has on me now being there was I was in a strong, loving family that had a home. Mm-hmm. And when I look back now at my upbringing, I realize all of the foundational things that I have that every child should have so that they're able to thrive. I will also say, and I say this to my rural bona fides, that I grew up in a town of 30,000 people. It's beaches, and it's lovely, but it's 30,000 people.
Right.
And so
small.
It's very small, and so I know small town living when I see it. Mm-hmm. And so even though our title is Housing and Urban Development, there's a fair amount of work we do in rural areas as well that we lean into.
Well, thank you for that. So now you're the acting secretary. Did you ever think you're going to be in the cabinet of a president growing up?
I'm sure if I go back to some high school book somewhere, I probably had some grandiose idea or something. So it probably wasn't this though, but it was probably something similar.
Well, you've transitioned from the deputy secretary to the acting secretary. We do have another deputy secretary, former deputy secretary, Pam Patnode, in the
my good friend and colleague.
here.
Good to see you, Pam.
But how has that transition been? I mean, how is the job different from being the deputy secretary to being the acting secretary?
That's a great question. And this is my 5th week in the job. And, and every morning I wake up and I say to myself, you know, what are the things that only I can do as the acting secretary to create some space between things that I don't need to do every day anymore.
Right.
And so, you know, the job of a secretary, acting secretary, is to be very outward looking, you know, making sure that we are meeting the rest of the country where they are, that we're focused on the things that the president and the vice president wants us to be focused on, right. That we're working with mayors and nonprofits in a way that is useful to them. And we're also just getting things across the line. So less talking, more doing. And so I'm trying to make sure that I hold up that part of the job.
So is the deputy secretary more of an internally focused responsibility, making sure that the wheels of the machine are running appropriately, as opposed to more of an outward face?
That is correct. It's considered the COO of any department. And so I was very focused internally to make sure that our outside posture was strong. And now, even though I peek behind the curtain to make sure things are still going well, I'm very outward focused.
I mean, I pity the acting deputy secretary because
he's doing a great job.
Right. Great. So, well, you mentioned the president. You know, in his recent State of the Union address, he devoted 9 lines to housing, which, for those of us in the housing policy community, was significant. Yes. I mean, you don't 9 lines in the State of the Union is significant. So, where does housing rank among the administration's overall priorities? And could you take a moment to describe some of the initiatives the administration is pursuing to improve housing affordability, sure. both on the supply side, which we focus on a lot here at the Terwilliger Center and BPC, but also on the demand side?
Absolutely. So let me just say, even though I was aware that it was very likely the president was going to talk about housing in the State of the Union, I was just giddy when it actually happened as a frustrated lifelong houser, really wanting that moment to sort of come to bear. So it was great. And it really just demonstrated how important housing is from the very top of this administration. And but it didn't begin with the State of the Union. I mean, a couple of years ago, we created a housing supply action plan, which was a all hands on deck across the administration, HUD, USDA, Treasury, making sure that we were pushing the envelope, even in light of the fact that we didn't have some of the funding and authorities that we wanted to have. Mm-hmm. And so it's been very effective and productive. We have seen things like the Federal Finance Bank Risk Sharing Initiative. We've removed the deadline there, so allow an opportunity for more HFAs to sort of be involved in that particular program. We've been working with our partners at Treasury to make sure that we are repurposing their state and local fiscal recovery funds as capital gap financing at the local level. So we have been a very busy administration, and housing ranks at one of the top issues that we're focused on.
Housing is such a locally driven issue, right? So it sometimes can be difficult to figure out what are the federal levers, what is the federal path to help promote supply, for example, more affordable housing supply, when so much is driven at the local level. Do you want to?
I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a very localized experience. But you know, we provide funding. You know, HOME, which is the largest grant program for housing in the country. We certainly have the LIHTC program that the Treasury administers. We have all the funds that we have to help with operating subsidy, whether it's our project-based vouchers. So while it is very localized, we still play a significant role in helping housing agencies and developers and nonprofits build housing that is affordable. So housing will be built, right? And we have seen about 1.3 million units come online over the past year or so. What's critical to us, particularly at HUD, that we're building for those individuals who are lower and moderate income, who are really, really having some housing affordability issues right now.
Do you see the housing affordability problem really as a sort of a mismatch between the demand, the great demand for housing, and available supply?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's not lost on anybody who pays attention to this how far behind we are as a country in the number of units we need, upwards of about 3 million. And it began just after the Great Recession, where it was hard to get credit. It was just hard to build. And there was a number of particularly single-family homes on the market that sort of absorbed some of the demand. But here we are. Several years later, and we do see that we have fallen behind. And so one of the reasons that we have been very intentional on our supply action plan, again, even in the face of not having all the resources that we need, is making sure we're doing everything we can to help localities and governors. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is our pro-housing program. We talk a lot about resources, but we also need to make sure that we're creating an environment where housing can be built at all.
Now, the pro-housing program, that provides grants to local communities?
Right. It's a new program. It's going to provide 85...
Funded by the Congress.
Funded by the Congress, a very bipartisan way. $85 million that will go to states, localities, others, to really incentivize and motivate folks to remove the barriers to building more housing, whatever those barriers may be at the local level. And so we are poised and getting ready to release those awards this spring.
Great. At the Terwilliger Center, we're very focused on an issue we think is not given as much attention as it deserves, and that is the preservation of the existing stock of affordable housing, because housing often, I mean, if you look at the numbers about LIHTC, their affordability restrictions are going to expire a large number of units in the coming years. So, what steps do you think the government, the private sector, the nonprofit community can take to ensure that affordable housing remains affordable?
Absolutely. We need more. We have to take care of what we have. And I'll begin with the most vulnerable portfolio, and that's our public housing sites that are at about $70 billion of capital needs that we need for that particular portfolio. I think that our rental assistance demonstration program, RAD, has done a great job sort of repositioning many of those sites, but we still see a need out there, and many of us read the headlines, which just demonstrates the need. So we continue to make sure that we are working with local agencies, but we also have a new program for our privately owned asset housing portfolio, our multifamily portfolio, a new budget-based program that will help some of those owners address some of their long-term capital needs as well. In addition to that, we always partner with our local houses on the ground on ways to use HUD's existing funds to not just build, but to preserve, using home, certainly using our D4 program, using all the programs that we have. I'm going to try not to get too huddling.
It's important. I mean, there's a bunch of houses.
There's a bunch of houses here. You understand.
You can get a little.
You speak this language.
Right. But we try to keep this an acronym-free
Absolutely,
zone.
Absolutely.
So we also want to welcome our C-SPAN audience who out there listening to us today. So, one issue that has really captured my attention and our attention at the Terwilliger Center is the issue of rising insurance costs and their impact on housing affordability. Insurance costs are going up and up. Some insurers are now not insuring homes in certain areas of the country. I know you recently testified about this issue in Congress. Could you tell us what HUD is doing?
I have yet to meet a multifamily building owner who doesn't talk about sort of the pressures that insurance is bringing to their annual operating costs. I have yet to meet a single family owner, current or a first-time homeowner, who are having difficulties getting insurance that is affordable to them. Now, certainly insurance is not something that sits inside of HUD's authority. But we recognize that there are things that we can do to be helpful. So just under a year ago, I did create an internal working group to really scan the department to see what can we do. And so we looked at our multifamily portfolio, our single family. We looked at our public housing portfolio. We looked at what's the research that's out there that we need to pay attention to. Are there things that HUD is doing now by way of building more resilient housing that will help reduce insurance costs in months and years to come? And we have some immediate quick wins. Just last week, we announced a new wind and storm damage insurance initiative from our Office of Housing that we think will help in terms of ways that HUD is bringing its authorities to bear for our multifamily and single-family owners.
So it's a focus of HUD. This is something that...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in fact...
It sounds like you've been working this issue for about a year.
Well, we wanted to make sure we're being thoughtful about what we can do and looking at things that we require, but also looking at things that we can do to meet the moment and have folks share. Many housing owners may not know ways in which they can send additional information to us that increases the amount of funds that HUD can provide them to deal with this cost. There is a larger issue, though, which is just rising insurance costs to begin with. And we are going to have a special session on that in the next month or so.
Okay, great. Another important topic, many of us were maybe startled or surprised, not pleasantly, when the point in time count numbers were released earlier this year that showed more than 653,000 people were experiencing homelessness, an increase of 12% from 2022. So in your it's a complex problem, but in your view, what are the root causes of homelessness and what should the federal response be?
It was disheartening to see that increase across all the subpopulations for unhoused brothers and sisters across the country. But I want to have us all keep in mind that that point in time count occurred in January of 2023. And since that time, the administration has done a lot to sort of help localities sort of meet their moments. We've provided a historic new program centered around unsheltered homelessness for help mayors deal with some of the encampments that they're experiencing. We also provided new funds to rural communities. We helped with some of our unhoused youth. And we also deployed the largest amount of funds, $3.1 billion, for those nonprofits that are at the front lines doing the heavy lift every single day to make sure they had the resources that they need. During this year's point in time, I was in Indianapolis. It's one of the few cities in the country that actually saw homelessness go down.
Did you participate in it?
I did. I did participate. Saw their homelessness, their overall homeless numbers go down, just to sit with them and understand what their experience is like, things that they think are working. So as I travel the country, I'm able to sort of share some of that thoughts with other mayors.
Well, speaking of Indianapolis, what would you consider, what are the local communities that are doing good things or getting this job done?
Yeah, I think it's just a high level of coordination. I mean, homelessness seems very simple when you think about, look, there's someone I see there at the corner who needs help. One of the things that works effectively is when there's a high level of coordination between those frontline people who are dealing with unhoused individuals, with the folks who have housing, folks who are administering vouchers. And so where we experience high levels of coordination and political intentionality to try to make sure we are dealing with this, I think we see some wins. But I will say this, we always need resources to make sure that we are meeting that intentionality. And it's one of the reasons why the president in each one of his budgets has been very intentional in asking for more rental assistance to help folks who are not just homeless, but are at risk of homelessness, including older Americans who we're seeing beginning to experience some homelessness risk as well.
Yeah, I think senior homelessness is the fastest rising cohort.
I think we have the boomers are booming, and so we're trying to make sure we're taking care of that very vulnerable population.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, we had a webinar with Henry Cisneros, BPC's board chair, on the issue of homelessness, and we had the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, the former mayor of Houston,
Yes.
Anise Parker, and the point was made in that webinar that this issue of leadership and this issue of coordination, particularly that was Mayor Parker's sort of lesson for us, is that when, getting everybody working together,
That's right.
coordinated.
That's right.
So a lot of people trying to do good things, but if they don't know what everybody else is doing, and
You've got to measure it so you know when you're having an impact, and you have to have one North Star, and where that where there's many good leaders who are working hard and also saw their numbers go up. And there, one of the things that we have found is that the social safety net that really enveloped the country during the pandemic, whether it was the child tax credit or some of the checks that folks got from Treasury, we saw that folks were able to sustain themselves. So we know what works. We were able to stem a homelessness crisis during the pandemic because all of those supports were around Americans across the country. And when those began to sort of peel away and their end dates came, is when we began to see this increase. So I don't think while it was disheartening, I don't think it was terribly surprising that as we saw that begin to happen, we saw what was happening. And that's why we took those critical steps last year to try to make sure that we were putting more resources out there.
great. Well, now that we've heard about some of the administration's housing priorities, where do you think the greatest opportunities for bipartisanship around housing and meeting the housing needs of so many people who are struggling to?
Absolutely.
So where can we get something done?
Housing is one of those issues that is bipartisan in its very nature. I think everybody, no matter where you are, where you're from, and who understands that everybody needs a home. And so I'm always very grateful for some of the great ideas that come out of BPC to help advance that.
Thank you.
There's some great ideas on the Hill right now that are bipartisan in nature. We know that there's more we can do to strengthen and expand the LIHTC program, low-income housing tax credit program, low-income housing tax credit program,
Which incentivizes private
private investment into affordable housing. It's been around for decades, wildly successful, one of the biggest generators of affordable housing in the country. So we know there's great ideas up there to champion that work and to expand. We also know there's other great ideas. Because we know that first-time homeowners are finding it difficult to find that first home. They might have a down payment, they might be ready to go, but they literally can't find a home. And so there's other ideas up there that help sort of kickstart having some starter homes built to use
Neighborhood Homes Investment Act.
as an example. And I think that those are the kind of things that we look to Congress to embrace because we think it will make a difference.
Yeah, well, here, we strongly support the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act, which unbelievably has like 218, don't hold me to that number, are sponsors, it's both Republican and Democrat, evenly divided, and the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. So getting both of those bills over the finish line would be, I think, make a big difference.
It's bipartisan in nature, and I hope Congress will act.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the demand side. We just talked about the supply side, which seems to be where most of the bipartisanship is. But the Housing Choice Voucher Program is an incredibly important program. Helps more than 2.3 million low-income households afford the rent in the private rental market. But unfortunately, some estimates are about 40% of people, after waiting maybe months, if not years, to get a voucher, are simply unable to utilize the voucher. They can't find a willing landlord. So what can be done? And landlords complain, some landlords complain that it's administratively burdensome. The inspection process takes too much time. And they have mortgages too, and need the rent to pay their own mortgage. So I mean, what can be done to, at least administratively, to increase landlord participation in the housing choice voucher
Well,
program?
to your point, there's like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 eligible households receive a voucher from the federal government. And so we know we need more from a demand perspective. As it relates to things that we can do from in our authorities, we have been pushing out the door, and I will say I've been helping to push as well, making sure that some of the relief that the department received to administer the program years ago through a law that's called HOTMA, that we're getting those rules across the finish line so we can help local agencies sort of administer the program. One example of that, and something that's already been done, is being able to use some of the federal funding very flexibly so we can get people into units. But we know that the program is very complex. As somebody who's actually run a voucher program,
Yes.
it is very complex and we can do a lot better. And those are conversations we're having now, like what more can we do? I think we're quietly beginning to hit a wall on the things that HUD can do with its authorities. And so we have been talking to the landlord community. HUD has had dozens of stakeholder engagements across the country to talk to landlords about what makes a difference in running this program. We know what that is. And so we're formulating some ideas now, looking at what we can do, but certainly sort of maybe a legislative agenda that we need to have.
Yeah, maybe a lot of what is legislatively mandated.
That is correct.
Some of these inspection requirements are
That is correct.
legislatively mandated, so HUD can't just.
But I will say, one of the things I hear from landlords is they recognize the need, but they also see sometimes the different ways in which the program is administered,
Right.
sometimes even in the same region. So we're also working with the administrators of the program, housing agencies, to lift up those best practices so we can try to house people quickly and encourage more landlords to be involved in the program.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. I know your team at PD&R and
Yes.
PIH
That's right.
are working hard.
Policy development and research.
Oh, I
public and
violated
Indian
the
housing.
rule.
See,
I
there
did
you
some
go. I
acronyms.
gotcha.
Thank you. Slap on the wrist. Thank you for correcting me on that. I slipped there. We believe that factory-built housing, not on-site, but factory-built housing presents an opportunity.
Yes.
To increase the supply of homes quickly and efficiently without jeopardizing quality. And so, what do you see as the most significant barriers to greater adoption of factory-built housing in the marketplace? And what is HUD doing in this area? I know it regulates manufactured housing.
Yes. So we do. We are the owners of something called the HUD code. It feels very serious. HUD code for manufactured housing. But we're doing a lot of work in terms of, from a policy perspective, but also from a building perspective on modular housing. Each year, for the past 3 years, we've hosted this phenomenal event, our Innovations in Housing Showcase, right on the National Mall.
Right.
Where
So it is an amazing event.
It is
People
amazing.
should go.
If you ever loved a tiny home and you want to see one in real life, not on TV,
Right.
you want to come down to the National Mall. I think it's June 6th through 8th or 7th through 9th. Lots of homes will be built on the mall. But in addition to just sort of making sure people understand that modular and manufactured housing isn't what it was 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
We're also seeing, you asked about what some of the barriers, it's some of the local rules. A lot of folks still think that modular and manufactured housing is sort of the 1960s, 1970s sort of trailer parks. And so their vision of innovation is not that. And so we are working with folks who want to introduce modular and manufactured housing. By folks, I mean mayors and county executives, on ways that they can do that. In fact, we have a program for that. It's a new program that's called the PRICE program.
Okay.
It's about $200 million. I think it might be on the street now. I might have the dates wrong, where we are finding ways to really lift up this concept of innovations in housing and also to protect those communities that are living in manufactured housing communities and making sure that they are okay. We know we have built housing the same way for decades now. And we think it's time for us to, particularly in a supply crisis, to be able to think not just about credit and about how many units do we need to build to keep up, but also how to do it in new ways. We have new financing tools that we've put on the street for accessory dwelling units or ADUs, just in case,
No, those are very important. Yeah.
those are very important. So we're doing everything we can at HUD to sort of lift up these innovations.
Well, that's great. Another issue is this issue of natural disasters. Unfortunately, we're seeing too many of them, and the president's budget supports authorizing the Community Block Development Grant Disaster Recovery Program. I'm going to use an acronym. CEBG.
When you're in DC, you just can't not do it.
I know. Rather than continuing the practice of Congress just appropriating emergency funds to HUD when disasters strike. So how would this authorization affect the program in practice, and why do you think it's needed?
Yeah. So HUD's disaster recovery program, I like to say, is the program that is helping communities when they're no longer in the headlines. We sadly have seen the frequency of storms and the severity of storms, whether they be floods or tornadoes or hurricanes. I'll say that this is a very personal issue for me, being a daughter of the Caribbean and whose own family has been impacted and they've been displaced because of hurricanes. And so it is an issue to not have this critical community intervention not be authorized. What it means is that HUD right now, we are unable to have the kind of responsiveness that mayors and leaders need us to have, governors need us to have, Democrat or Republican need us to have when people are at their most vulnerable, right? There is, disaster recovery is community development on steroids. I've been to Mayfield, Kentucky, very tiny town. A tornado came through. Town was effectively just
wiped out.
Just wiped out. I've been to Florida after Ian in Fort Myers and seen some of the disasters there, and I've been to New Jersey. I've been to Maui after the wildfires there. Just horrific moments for people and their leaders. So this program is more than a program. It is almost a healing that communities need to be able to stand back up and get back to where they need to be, and something that helps families, of course, get there as well. And so it certainly needs to be authorized. We've set it in multiple of our proposals right now, and we are waiting.
Great. Well, I'm going to open it up, the floor, to questions. We have a microphone, and if anyone would like to ask a question, just raise your hand, and please identify yourself and any organizational affiliation you might have.
So let me warn you, you can ask, and I may or may not answer.
Right.
Hi, I'm James. I was actually surprised to learn Henry Cisneros' webinar that the continuum of care is actually quite relatively new. I think it was developed by him and then deputies Cuomo, I think, COC. I was just curious to know what your relationship was with the COC, developing the COC as deputy, and also if you could explain what the COC award competition is and how those are criteria, how those are distributed.
Right. So I'm going to show my age just a little bit.
Well, you can't compete with
I did not play a hand in the creation of continuums of care, but I was in the Weaver building as a much younger staffer when the concept was created by the leadership that you just mentioned. And what we try to do is make sure that our continuums of care, which again are the nonprofits who are at the front line of helping our unhoused brothers and sisters and neighbors across the country, have the resources and the technical assistance that they used. And deploying the highest amount of funds ever to them, $3.1 billion earlier this year, was something we were very proud of. We know that they're working extraordinarily hard. And we always want to make sure that they know that HUD is here to help. And so it's a great concept. It shows a true public-private partnership with the nonprofits, and it's work that we continue to support.
Question over there.
Madam Secretary, congratulations from the industry. I know there's a lot of confidence and comfort in your appointment, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
The question I have is you mentioned Indianapolis and their success with reducing homelessness. Are there any communities that come to mind with regard to meeting their goals on the on producing new units?
That's a great question. I mean, I think there is a number of localities who are doing that. We know that Minneapolis took some really bold steps some years ago in terms of what they did to remove barriers. And I think that they proudly feel as though, and I think it is true, that they've seen some growth in the number of units that are produced there. We know that there are many other cities like Charlotte, like Austin, who, whenever you're there, you're seeing just units being built and units that are affordable as well. I was in Nashville not too long ago and saw a number of investments that that city was making using the state and local fiscal recovery funds, but also using some of HUD's tools as well to make sure that they were building. So there's a number of cities across the country who are working very diligently. I think the question is now pace and just the need.
I'm going to just interject on it. I know there are a couple of more audience questions, but this is from our virtual audience. It's on the issue of homelessness. Can you speak to the lessons learned from the joint HUD VA supportive housing programs and how they can shape further action on this issue?
So I think we're talking about the VASH program,
Right.
which is a unique. So imagine one department trying to solve a complex issue. Imagine having two departments working together to solve a complex issue. But that's exactly what HUD and Veterans Affairs is doing with its VASH program, which, if there's any lesson learned through VASH, is that we have the capacity to reduce homelessness in some parts of the country, eliminate homelessness for veterans when properly resourced. With the use of VASH, we saw a reduction of veterans' homelessness by 50%. 50%. So we know that it can be done. And so I think that it just shows, if we were to expand the voucher program writ large, the kind of impact it could have. Instead of serving 1 in 4, 1 in 5, we're serving, substantially more Americans. So VASH is a great model of what we can do, and it also pairs services for the needs that some veterans have who are coming off the street. So it's a great program. We work very closely with Secretary McDonough and his team to make sure that it's being used effectively.
Thank you. I think we have Seth Appleton.
Hey, Seth.
Secretary Todman, congratulations on your new role. I think it's great for the department and the country's housing needs. Building off on the last question, taking it a little bit different direction, it seems like a lot of the programs at HUD and the work that it does currently requires kind of close collaboration, partnership with other agencies or other stakeholders on the ground. In the housing finance system, there's a similar need, particularly kind of in the world post the Housing and Economic Recovery Act that was enacted during the financial crisis, which created the Federal Housing Finance Agency across the street. And HUD continues to play a really important role in mortgage finance policy, as does FHFA. How do we ensure that there is close kind of coordination and collaboration between those two agencies to ensure that we're kind of responsibly and sustainably expanding access to mortgage credit, rather than just kind of shifting share back and forth between HUD or FHFA or, at the GSEs, the VA, USDA? There are just so many different agencies that play a role in this space, and so would love to hear your thoughts on how to ensure that there's collaboration and coordination in that area.
Thank you, Seth. Good to see you. So I've got to say that perhaps, and somebody can sort of push back on this, when I say perhaps, I don't think there's been as much collaboration as there is now between HUD and FHFA. Sandra Thompson has been someone that both former Secretary Fudge and now I lean lean to in terms of ways that we can strengthen the housing finance system. And in fact, we work so collaboratively that she was sitting next to me at my hearing last week.
That's right, yeah.
Before Senate banking. So that's collaboration right there
Were you finishing
in real
each
time.
other's sentences?
Not quite, but
Okay.
we were darn close. But we certainly work collaboratively with each other in terms of not just access to credit, but ways in which the GSEs and HUD and others can do everything we can, even from a supply perspective. And certainly from a first-time homeowner perspective. So there's high levels of collaboration between the director and the department and her full team, and that will continue.
Thanks for that question, Seth. I have, yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Kayla, and I'm with the YMCA. And I just wanted to thank you so much for your for HUD's willingness to work with our nonprofit community during the community funding, project funding process. And I'm just wondering, like, are there ways that, like, in the nonprofit community, we can help our applicants build either stronger applications or work smarter within the regulatory process?
Absolutely. So, number one, I'm still learning things about HUD. I mean, it's shocking. It's shocking. I know.
That's what makes the job enjoyable.
That's what makes the job enjoyable.
Right.
But HUD's breadth and depth, and I know my colleague Pam would agree with me, we have probably intersections in the built environment in probably everything that any community needs. And so we talked about homelessness. I am sure that many folks may not know that HUD is in the healthcare facility business, that we also do mortgage insurance
FHA, yeah.
to build out healthcare, whether they're nursing home facilities or full hospitals in communities that need it the most, but for us could not find the financing. And this is a long way of saying that, number one, I think the number one thing for any emerging nonprofits out there is to pay attention to all the different things that HUD does in all the various ways that we do it. I talked about urban development. We have a whole body of work in rural America. We have, I'm not gonna use acronyms. We have a program that helps rural nonprofits figure out how to build in their communities, how to deal with their homelessness issues in their communities. We also have a dedicated technical assistance program for folks who just want to get to know HUD a little bit better. We do a lot of work with making sure small businesses that want to work with HUD understand how to get access to HUD's contracts. So I think part of it, and this sounds really kind of corny, but going to our website, HUD.gov, seems kind of one-stop shop, but it really is.
Right.
And we'll not just teach about the breadth of work that HUD carries out, but how nonprofits can be engaged.
You also have regional offices throughout.
We have regional offices across the country. We are over 8,000 employees strong. Most of those folks are across the country in every state, and so we also have that resource. Thanks for bringing that up.
I got to ask you a question from the virtual audience because it's a topic that's on the minds of a lot of people these days. Okay.
I'm ready.
Another innovation that hasn't come up yet, which is artificial intelligence. How has HUD been thinking about the role of AI in housing?
Right. So I think it's fair to say that the White House has taken a leadership role, making sure that there is harmony across the departments and how they're coming at this work. We all have expectations of having an AI governance, that we are taking AI and looking at it in a very serious way, not just as a threat, but as an opportunity to really create efficiencies in our work. So HUD does have a governance structure. We have been talking to our leaders at HUD about those kind of use cases that really expand on our work. But we're also doing it in a way that is consistent with the value we place on our employees as well, and making sure it is employee-centered in making their work more efficient. And so there's more to come there. There's a lot I'm not allowed to say, but there's more to come there.
All right, stay tuned.
Stay
right?
tuned.
Right.
That's right.
Well, we're hitting our time limit, but let me just ask one final question to close this out. Reflecting on your career so far, do you have any words of wisdom for young people who might be considering a career in public service?
So number one, go where your journey takes you. Right? I always say that be prepared for good luck. You asked the question earlier, did I think I would be here in this? No, I mean,
You didn't plan this all out.
there was nothing about 18-year-old Adrian where she was sitting around saying, you know what my path is? Public housing. Like that did not come up in my conversations with myself. But here's the thing. I think I feel like younger folks these days may have a crisis in confidence, right? And I think that if there's any words of wisdom I can impart, is be confident on the things that you are good at, right? Particularly women, particularly people of color, who sometimes feel they don't have agency and voice in rooms. I would also say that folks should think about what brings them joy. Now, sometimes it's, particularly if you're younger, your work isn't bringing you joy. If you're very lucky, there's a match. But I also think that as you evolve and become older, find something that brings you joy because it feels less and less like work. It just feels like living. And surround yourself with people who have faith in you as well. So confidence, have faith, find joy, and the rest will happen.
These are wonderful words of advice. Thank you. I feel like I should be writing it down, but that's really great advice. So thank you so much. And again, I want to thank you very, very much for honoring us with your presence today and allowing us to host you here at the BPC.
Thank you.
And for sharing your insights and information. It's been a great conversation, and I want to thank everyone here at BPC for joining us, and to our virtual and C-SPAN audiences, thank you as well. And that is it for the day, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Take care, everyone.